But this is a book that is around the synagogue. When you study with any one of our teachers, they will refer to the Tanakh. And Tanakh, I'm going to do this in English. There are three types of scriptures. There are three types of scriptures that we refer to. Okay, so what's everybody know? What's the first thing that comes to mind? What do we study all the time? What's the most important scripture that we have?
Torah.
Torah. Okay. So I'm going to translate it now. Which way is this way. Okay. So Torah. Okay, so that's where the T or the Tav comes from. I'm going to put it here because it's Hebrew. Torah is the 5 books of Moses, right? It's okay, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay, very quickly, Genesis is the story of our 4 fathers. Actually, 3 fathers and 4 mothers. Right, 4 fathers. That would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and all their troubles that they get into, and all the stealing of birthrights, and just that whole story of who our ancestors are. That is in the book of Genesis. Second book is Exodus. Take a guess.
We leave.
Yeah, we leave. We leave town. We get stuck in Egypt, and we leave town. And we're in the desert. We get the 10 Commandments. We get the law. As I mentioned last week, there are 2 covenants that we have in the book of Genesis. There is we're dating God in a way, right? God says do this. We don't do this. Sometimes we do it. Sometimes we don't. God's checking us out. We're checking God out. All of a sudden, on Mount Sinai, we have a marriage. We accept not only the Torah, but Torah, right? We are now stuck together. We are married. God never leaves us. God gets mad at us from time to time. That's the unconditional covenant. God will never leave us because we accepted the Torah. The conditional covenant is if you mess around with God and you start assimilating, and you start taking on other gods, and you start worshiping wood and stone and alchemy, if you start sacrificing children, as was the case in those days, if you do all those things, then God's going to leave town. God's going to leave your presence, and you're going to have Suris Oivesmir. And just when you think that God has left town permanently, God remembers the unconditional covenant, rescues us at the last minute, and guess what? That's the story of the Jewish people when you actually think about it. Either it's coincidence or it's prophecy, and I'll leave that up to you. That's Exodus. Leviticus is a whole bunch of laws about sexuality and about purity and about kashrut. And Numbers is the completion of our journey through the wilderness. And Deuteronomy is the morality code. If you're good, this happens, and if you're bad, that happens. Okay, that's the Torah. Next, the middle part of this book. And if you want to open it up to the index, is a series of teachings and a series of books called the Prophets. The Prophets. We read this every Saturday morning. Marilyn's our primary reader, and in Hebrew, the word for prophets is Nevi'im. Okay? So let's name them prophets. Let's name some prophets. Elijah, thank you. But the different books that we may read from. Ezra. Jeremiah, right. Jeremiah was a prophet.
Who happens to be my favorite.
I love the fact that you even have a favorite. It means we've been studying this for long enough that you have a favorite, right? What do the Christian people quote from quite a bit in the prophets? Isaiah. Isaiah is really, really big. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joshua, thank you, Judges, there's a whole, so that would be all of these prophets. Samuel, thank you. That's a perfect one. Samuel. Samuel tells the story of David and Goliath and King David and all these other. Okay, so that's the te and the ne. And the last part is called ketuvim, or chetuvim, which we're going to put in as a ch, and that means writings. Now, whenever a prophet speaks, Moses, Jeremiah, Isaiah, God is speaking through them. So whenever somebody is quoting Isaiah in traditional Judaism, if Isaiah says on Yom Kippur, by the way, watch in the Haftorah this year on Yom Kippur, it says that I don't need your fast, says Isaiah. I don't need you to go, I don't need you to fast. I don't need you to do all these rituals. What do I need? Why do we have Project Isaiah here? What does Isaiah say? I want you to
have a good heart.
Have a good heart, meaning?
Do good deeds.
Meaning, it's even more specific than that.
Feed the hungry.
Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and take in the homeless when you see them.
And the widow
and the widow and the orphan, etc., etc. That is in the words of the prophets of these books. The third set of books is called ketuvim, or chetuvim. And it includes books. And I'm going to name a couple. These guys are not necessarily prophets, but what did we just read this week?
The Megillah.
The Megillah Esther. There's no prophet. By the way, whose name is nowhere to be found in the Megillah? God's name, nowhere to be found. Okay, it's a story about Queen Esther, right? The Persian Idol contest. She wins. She becomes. Okay, it's a story. It's a writing. It's neat, but it's sort of not the Torah, and it's not the prophets. It's writings. Okay, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die. What's that? Ecclesiastes. Prophet? No. Beautiful writing? You bet. You bet. I begin every funeral with that with that reading. Ketuvim. Okay? I'm just going to name another. If anybody has it open, I'm going to just think for myself. Song of Songs. We're going to get to Song of Psalms, which is a piece of erotica. It's gorgeous. It's a man and a woman and breasts and things, and it's a beautiful, beautiful love story. Also is in the writings. So whenever we refer to the word Tanakh, what you see on the cover, here it is sort of abbreviated. What's it called? An acronym?
Acronym.
Yeah. And on the bottom, here it is in Hebrew. Goes the other way. We're referring to the collection, and that is our tradition, by and large, of writings. So when people are quoting scripture, they're either quoting Torah, or they're quoting prophets, or they're quoting the Ketuvim. I'm going through just the first session or two just to get through some terminology so that when I'm referring to anything, you have an idea. And again, this is not mysterious stuff. I don't want anything to go by you that you say, what was that? Can everybody see this in the... Yes?
What's the Haftorah?
Okay. Does everybody know does everybody understand what the question is?
Yes.
If anybody does not know what a Haftorah is, there's no wrong answers. Raise your hand and say you don't know. Don't know? It's okay. Okay. All right. At the end of the Torah reading every week, somebody comes up and recites a piece of prophets, a piece of the prophets. So, for example, this week we read about the golden calf in the Torah reading. So the rabbis go, what can we do to read an additional reading from the prophets that has a parallel theme? Here's why. When the temple was destroyed, the Jews were told soon after, leave town, or you cannot read. You cannot study up. Here's the mistake by the Romans and by the Byzantines. Don't study the Torah. What mistake did they make? Listen, what did I just say? Don't study the Torah. What did they miss? Torah.
Everything else.
Okay, so in other words, they said don't study the T, but the rabbi said that means that we can study the Nach, so to speak. So the rabbi said, you know what, we're not really big into, by the way, I'm a rabbi, as I said last week, and I can probably quote the place of maybe 2 things in the entire Torah. I'm just not concerned about where these chapter and verse come from. I can quote you Genesis 1:1, right? And there's a phrase that happens at the beginning of a chapter, which I just happen to know where it is. I can't tell you. I think the 10 Commandments are 19:7 in Exodus, but I'm not concerned about that. So the Romans said, don't study chapter and verse. Rabbi said, we like a good argument. We don't care what chapter and verse. So, for example, this week we read this story out of the Book of Kings, which dates back 3,000 years ago, about how Elijah, there was a big, There was a big famine in the land. And Elijah says to Queen Jezebel, if we had Graggers, Jezebel is the woman equivalent of Haman, right? We have King Ahab 3,000 years ago, and he has a wife named Jezebel. They start to worship idols, and an idol called Baal, B-A-A-L, wood, stone, etc. And we have Elijah the prophet, and they have basically a competition, right? This is the WWF face-off, gods to gods. Who can bring about rain or fire to get rid of the famine? Now the rabbis are trying to tell us, don't worship golden calves. But they take last week the example of the Book of Kings to teach us about don't worship idols. Guess who wins this one? You want to take a guess? Is it the prophets of Baal, or is it Elijah summoning the God of the Hebrews? Let's take a guess on this one. And it's actually quite funny yesterday because we're reading it and Elijah says, okay, Baal, okay, you guys, go conjure up. And the Haftorah says that everybody starts jumping and doing cartwheels and whatever. And Elijah says, so where's your God? Is he on vacation? Is he out of town? Is he visiting relatives? Maybe he's sleeping, right? The Haftorah is this. During the times that we were not allowed to read the Torah, the rabbis selected from this column to inspire us to do the same lessons or arguments that we would have had we done that. We don't need much to actually direct ourselves to a good argument or a good discussion. The Haftorah is what your children read for their bar and bat mitzvah. It is the additional section of the prophets. And for those of you who choose to do this for your bat mitzvah, you can read a section of the prophets. This is that big long thing that when you go to a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, that the rabbi says, please give Mendel your full attention because they've studied very hard and you're busy looking at them and feeling very proud, but you have no idea what they're saying. What they're actually saying is whatever's in the Torah. Now, when we were allowed to read the Torah again, and we got back control of our religious freedom, the rabbis kept this little extra section, this extra little reading from the prophets. That's why you'll read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Samuel, etc., etc. That's the difference between Torah, Nevi'im, and Tanakh, and the writings, Book of Ruth, stuff like that. And that's the word Tanakh. Any questions? Is this helpful? Or I know I'm talking. Yeah. So we're going through some definitions here, and I'm trying. So these are basically I would give you the top 5, or thank you, the top 6. Written and oral traditions. That's why I always say that what comes out of your mouth is more important than what comes off the page. The written Torah is important because it gives us all the laws to drash about. Mishnah is the written law. Talmud is the discussions. And Tanakh is our collection of writings. And is it 11 o'clock? Beautiful. Okay. I need to go to funerals, or to preside over a funeral at the Guttermans, so Next week, what I'd like to begin doing is talking about, and just before Gustavo begins, I want to actually, we're going to talk about a word called, and I'm going to do everything in English, tzedakah. And actually,
That's the next week? Is that what you're saying?
tzedakah, thank you. And I'm going to be discussing charity, tzedakah, kind-heartedness, and where the word comes from. And I'm just going to begin by this. The word tzedakah, remember we talked last night, what's a mitzvah? Be careful before you answer it. What's the word mitzvah?
Well, we said it was more than a good deed.
Close, 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 close. The word mitzvah means?
Doing something without being asked?
No,
Close?
it's a commandment.
No, commandment.
Commandment. It's a commandment, right? 613 commandments. You are commanded to be nice. You are commanded to do a good deed. You are commanded to give tzedakah, but you don't have a choice. These are not 10 suggestions. These are not 613 suggestions. These are the things that we are supposed to do. When someone says it's a mitzvah, it's one of the 613 commandments, but a mitzvah means a commandment. You are commanded to eat matzah on Passover. It's a commandment. Included in the 613 is to be kind and to be nice and to. And this is where I'm going to leave you. There's a word here in the middle of tzedakah, and it means tzedek. Tzedek means, oh boy, we're about to get invaded by okay. Tzedek means justice and equal distribution of justice. So tzedek, the word tzedek, tzedakah, does not mean charity. Somebody says, give tzedakah. What it means is, if you have more, it's very socialist. If you have more, give to that who has less. And if you have less, it's okay to put out your hand to take. Or as we say in the chapel, what they used to say in the old days, when they used to bring the plate around at the end of the, either give or take. So,